So we all know that Joffrey was not the best king in Game of Thrones. On top of not even being a legitimate Baratheon, so his claim to the throne was null and void, he was just an all-around terrible guy who had no business sitting on the Iron Throne. He insulted the people around him, humiliated his own family, abused and tortured the people beneath him for no other reason than because he could. In contrast, his younger brother Tommen was kind, receptive to the counsel of others for knowledge and wisdom, and wasn't drunk on power. Too bad he was very naive and his reign was so short-lived. But I can't help but wonder, Joffrey stepped on a lot of toes as heir to the Iron Throne, and later on as king. But what if in some cosmic change of events, Tommen had actually been the one who had been born first? What if Tommen had been the heir to the Iron Throne and later on the king to the Seven Kingdoms instead of his brother? With Joffrey being so much younger and not being in a position of power to terrorize so many people later on, how much would change with the mild-mannered Tommen at the helm of the realm? Before we get into that though, if you guys like what I have to say today, feel free to drop a like on the video and subscribe for more. Now, let's get into it. I feel as if Tommen being born first and being the heir to the throne changes a few things in the story, but what I want to tackle first is who Tommen would be as a person in this new timeline. Now, it would be really easy to just copy and paste OG Tommen to this one, but due to the circumstances of his new life, I think some qualities of his character would change. Not a lot, but some. Reason being because there is a whole new set of responsibilities and expectations on his life now that he is heir to the Iron Throne and not despair. Tommen seemed to be a person despite being easily manipulated, that actually took being king seriously and tried doing things the right way. I think with Tommen being an older brother and keeping that desire to do well, you have an heir that's more responsible and devoted to his duties instead of expecting things to just fall into his lap once he has a crown. Tommen has a much stronger desire to prove himself as next in line to the Iron Throne as opposed to Cannon, since the weight of being Robert's successor would be on him from the very start, and pressure, especially at a young age like this, can affect someone's personality. But outside of those newfound expectations, another thing that I could see having an effect on how Tommen turns out in this timeline is his relationship with Cersei. I'm going to use Joffrey as an example here to explain what I'm getting at. Joffrey was pretty much a monster from the womb, most likely because of, the incest, but something that made him worse is the fact that he was coddled by Cersei growing up. He was spoiled by her to no end and made to believe that he could do whatever he wanted without consequence. Growing up the oldest child and heir to the throne, the future of the realm, Tommen would definitely be a person spoiled and coddled by Cersei the most. I don't think he's gonna be like Joffrey where he goes crazy because his mother made him think he's invincible. I think in contrast to Joffrey where being spoiled and built up to be perfect led him to going off the rails, I think Tommen might become more dependent on Cersei and her advice as opposed to Joffrey, who pretty much did whatever he wanted the second the crown was put on his head. So I guess he's like more of a mama's boy in this timeline, which isn't too hard to believe since Robert isn't much of a father to change that, but moving on. I think the general story of the first season stays the same with a few exceptions and changes here and there. First, you still have Robert riding north to get Ned to become his hand of the king and make a marriage proposal between the two houses. The only difference here is that Sansa will get engaged to Tommen instead of Joffrey in this timeline, since he's gonna be much younger. Joffrey wouldn't even be in the double digits at this point if he's taking the role of a younger son, and we saw how young Tommen was originally before he magically aged up like 5 years. After that, everything goes about the same in Winterfell. Bran will still climb the tower despite promising not to. He'll find Jaime and Cersei, get caught, and then get pushed. As the groups move to King's Landing and stop by the Trident, this is where more changes occur to the timeline. What originally happened on the Trident is what really set the Starks and Lannisters against each other. Joffrey was being an a-hole and wanted to show off to Sansa, having her drink wine, and then when he caught Arya playing with her friend Micah, he decided to torture the Butcher's Boy for playing a game with his friend. But really, it was just because Joffrey felt like being a prince allowed him to do whatever he wanted. Arya then attacks Joffrey to defend her friend, and Joffrey, with a real sword, attacks Arya and threatens to kill her until Nymeria bites his arm and then has to run away to avoid being killed. There was some serious fallout from this whole incident. The Butcher's Boy was killed for allegedly attacking the prince. Sansa lied about not knowing what happened so Joffrey would like her, and she could go on living in her fairy tale while also not outright making Arya the bad guy by lying and saying that she started the fight. But despite how she caters to the Lannisters, this leads to her direwolf lady, who is innocent in this whole thing, to be killed since Nymeria can't be found and Cersei wants her pound of flesh. This really drives that wedge between the families before the stuff about Bran's attempted assassination comes out, but with Tommen as the oldest son and the heir to the Iron Throne, none of what happened on the Trident in canon will actually happen here. As we've already touched on, Tommen has a much better temperament than his brother Joffrey, and while you may be able to reason that in this timeline he has a chip on his shoulder, he's not crazy like his brother and would actually respect the people around him. Tommen would not push Sansa to drink, and if they happen to stumble upon Arya and Micah playing together, I don't see an instance where he ever takes things as far as Joffrey did. He's not a sadist. He gains nothing from torturing a commoner than attempting to kill the sister of the girl he's supposed to marry. Tommen would honestly just be a much better match for Sansa in general and the Starks in this timeline. In canon, if you remember, Sansa has this really big idolization of royalty, princes, and princesses, and assumes that life is like the stories and fairy tales that she reads. Clearly, Joffrey didn't fit that bill, but if she's with Tommen, I think he'd be more in line with how she assumes nobility is supposed to be and act like, especially since Tommen would be more genuine about his feelings for her than Joffrey ever was. If you cut out that whole negative interaction with the kids, this heavily changes the Trident. If Nymeria never attacks the prince, then Arya never forces her to run away to save her life. If no princes were harmed and no direwolves escaped, this also means that Lady isn't killed by Ned, since Cersei has no reason to ask for a pound of flesh. Sansa never has to lie about anything, and the families will be on much better terms in general as they move to King's Landing. But moving on, let's assume that the general plot of season 1 goes about the same, because I don't see the addition of the direwolves or Tommen being the heir changing anything really important when it comes to season 1. Ned is still going to investigate the murder of Jon Arryn. He'll find out from Catelyn that Bran was almost murdered and start giving the Lannisters the side eye. He'll also still find out about Gendry and Robert's other bastard children. Catelyn still takes Tyrion prisoner, and this prompts Jaime to attack Ned and later join his father Tywin in raiding the Riverlands in revenge. Ned is still going to make plans to leave, or at least for his daughters to go back north so they can be safe. The only real difference I see happening here is that Sansa is much more insistent on staying in King's Landing because she's so smitten with Tommen, but other than that, Ned will still get the hints from his daughters that Robert's children are actually bastards.
He'll be the greatest king that ever was, a golden lion, and I'll give him sons with beautiful blonde hair.
The lion's not a sigil, idiot. He's a stag like his father.
Now, Tommen would have shown himself to be a far cry from Joffrey in the canon timeline. He's not unnecessarily cruel, he's polite, he's respectful, and he has a willingness to be king and do well at it. Perhaps he has potential if only given the opportunity. And he wouldn't have given Ned any red flags as a person to prove that he's unsuitable for the throne. But if we're gonna be completely honest here, even with what I just said, when Ned finds the book and learns the truth, I don't think it matters how nice Tommen is or how amiable of a person he is as well, and what potential he has as a ruler. Ned is still going to want to expose the truth to everyone. Ned is a man all about duty and honor, and that would dictate that Stannis is the rightful heir to the Iron Throne. It would be a disservice to his friend, the Baratheon family, and the laws of Westeros if he allowed a bastard born out of incest to inherit the Iron Throne. It's not the way things work around here, even if Tommen is a nice dude. And this is backed up by Ned's conversation with Renly. Renly says that Stannis, even if he is the rightful heir, isn't fit to rule the Seven Kingdoms. He's a soldier and a leader of armies, but a king is another story in his eyes. But whether that's true or not when it comes to Stannis being a good king, Ned still supports him because that's the order of things. That's the law. He has to honor it. So no matter how good Tommen seems, if Ned isn't willing to bend for someone who actually has Baratheon blood and a feasible claim to the Iron Throne, then there is no chance he kneels to Tommen. This will definitely result in him being in prison when he tries to expose Tommen as a bastard and claim the throne for Stannis. The Gold Cloaks and Littlefinger are still going to turn on Ned, and I feel like this whole incident where there is chaos in the Red Keep as the Lannisters take over could be the foundation of some more changes. They're kinda small, but they're there. For starters, one of the more pivotal moments during the Lannister takeover is when they try capturing the Stark girls. I think this will be a bit more hectic in this timeline for one reason: the direwolves. Primarily, what I'm thinking of here is what happens with Arya, Syrio Forel, and Meryn Trant. Meryn Trant comes in with some soldiers and tries to take Arya hostage. Syrio knocks out the soldiers but has a wooden sword that gets broken by Meryn, and he has to face him alone and tells Arya to run. But I think in this timeline, this is going to go differently. We know from the show that Arya and Nymeria are attached at the hip, so I think it would make a lot of sense that when Arya trains with Syrio, Nymeria also tags along during these sessions. So when Meryn comes in with its people, it won't just be Syrio and Arya, Nymeria the direwolf will be there as well. He'll give the order to kill Syrio and Nymeria. Syrio will do what he did in canon and knock everyone out, and then face Meryn Trant. Syrio will tell Arya to run, but I actually think when this confrontation happens, Nymeria will leap into action, probably sensing the danger that Arya is in, and help Syrio kill Meryn. Now, you may be thinking, but that makes no sense. Meryn has a sword and armor. How is Nymeria going to get through that? Which, fair point, but counterpoint.
Any boy whore with a sword could beat 3 Meryn Trant.
Not to mention, the direwolves are units. They grow big pretty fast, and it's not that far-fetched to assume that Nymeria would have grown during her time in King's Landing. There's even evidence for this as well. All the direwolves are a part of the same litter, and therefore they are the same age. Just look at Summer in the early parts of Season 1. He's a puppy, and if we know Nymeria is the same age as Summer, it really says something that Nymeria is the size of a bigger dog not too long after they leave Winterfell for King's Landing. So she could have easily hit a growth spurt or something like that during her time in King's Landing. Not to mention, I don't think the armor matters that much since Robb takes his direwolf Grey Wind out into battle all the time when he starts rebelling against the crown. Grey Wind catches multiple bodies in both the show and book, and I'm sure most of them are wearing armor and have swords too. So Nymeria helping Syrio take down Meryn makes sense, especially if Syrio ditches a broken wooden sword and takes a real one off the Lannister soldiers. So they could probably make light work of Meryn Trant. Now, while this is a pretty solid victory for the Starks, this would also be a big issue as well. Syrio and Arya would make plans to escape together. They may probably try to find Ned, but quickly realize that it's not the best idea since the Red Keep is swarming with Lannister soldiers, and escape should be their top priority. That being said, a giant wolf is a pretty big giveaway when they're trying to stay incognito. In canon, Arya was able to slip away and blend in so well to escape because she doesn't look like a typical noble highborn lady. She doesn't really have any defining features to single her out. Most people would see her outside and not give her a second glance, but with Nymeria around, she would be a dead giveaway, and a clear clue that this girl is a Stark. With that being said, even with the death of Meryn Trant, with Nymeria staying around, they could definitely still get captured. I also still think that Sansa will get captured as well. That won't change even with Lady being around and alive as well. Lady might be locked in Sansa's room or something like that, since Sansa doesn't strike me as someone who would feel the need to have her direwolf walk around with her at all times while she's getting used to life at court. So unlike the canon timeline, both the Stark girls get captured here, and I feel like Tommen would be so confused and conflicted about what's going on. His father's best friend just said he has no claim to the Iron Throne. Then absolute hell breaks loose as his family tries to take control of the Red Keep. Tommen would definitely be trying to find some sort of peaceful resolution to this conflict, but Cersei is going to be the one who takes the reins and gets in Tommen's head. When he questions why Ned stood against him, Cersei will spin the tale that Ned is just trying to look out for himself and claim the Iron Throne for his own ambitions, and that everything that they are doing is to ensure Tommen's safety. Tommen will go along with it because Cersei has her hooks in him, and when the trial of Ned comes around, it's going to be a very different outcome than it was before. He isn't trigger happy like his brother Joffrey, and doesn't have that same thirst for blood. I also imagine that he has a fairly decent relationship with Sansa, much more than what she had with Joffrey in the canon timeline, and wouldn't want to ruin that by killing her dad. So in this timeline, Tommen goes with the original plan set up by the Lannisters, which is just send Ned to the wall and have him take the Black, in hopes that this would placate the North, who would have risen in rebellion thanks to Robb wanting to get his dad back. Tommen would even give ice back to Ned and the Stark family as well. Remember, after Ned died, they sent his bones back north for the Starks, but they kept the Stark family ancestral sword, Ice, which is Valyrian steel, which was later melted down by Tywin and used to forge 2 new swords for House Lannister, Widow's Wail and Oathkeeper. But Tommen wouldn't do that or allow that to happen. Sending Ned back north to the wall and giving ice back to the family would be his way of showing good faith to the Starks. Honestly, I even think he will want to send Arya back north as well, since he doesn't seem to be a very hateful or vindictive person in canon, and even with the slight tweaks I made to his character here, which really aren't that much, I don't see him holding any ill will towards anyone. But one thing I could see happening is Cersei will be able to manipulate him into keeping Arya as leverage, therefore stopping her from going back home. Cersei may even plot to have Arya marry Joffrey, who is the younger brother in this timeline now. Now, why would she even do something like this? Well, to secure more power over the Starks and the North. Having a hostage is one thing, but having them bound to you in blood twice over is a different story. I mean, this is what Tywin did with Tyrion and Sansa. Even though by that point, Sansa was pretty much the only Stark around, the whole reason he had Sansa marry Tyrion was so he could have more power over the North and Winterfell. Now, when Ned makes his way back north without his daughters, he'll probably catch a trip with Yoren since he would have been in King's Landing when all this is going down, and they're going the same direction. The Lannisters may also send some soldiers to accompany them to ensure Ned gets to the wall as well. However, once Robb gets word that Ned is on his way back north, he'll be intercepted by his son's forces and have a meeting with Robb and Cat. With Ned being back in safer hands, this will halt the Northerners' advance through the kingdoms for a short moment while they sort things out. The Starks would still want Arya and Sansa back, so I don't see this being the end of their conflict with the crown just yet, especially when they talk to Ned about what really happened in King's Landing. Ned will inform them all of the truth, that the Lannisters murdered Robert and that Tommen and his siblings are bastards with no claim to the Iron Throne. This would be pretty pivotal because with the knowledge that the royal line are bastards, Robb and the other people of the North may think that Tommen's decree to have Ned sent to the wall no longer has any weight since he's not a true king. With this knowledge in mind, they may not only consider continuing to stand in defiance, but also trying to reinstate Ned as Lord of Winterfell on the foundation that Tommen is an illegitimate bastard, and therefore so are his orders and decrees as a monarch. But if I'm being entirely honest, I don't think Ned would allow this to happen. I feel that because of Ned's honor and sense of duty, he would accept the sentencing for the time being because right now, Tommen is seen as the rightful king by the masses, and he's already confessed to treason and made himself into a criminal. His primary goal right now would really be getting his daughters back and nothing else, and he doesn't need to be Lord of Winterfell to do that. Not that there's anything he could really do if he was reinstated as Lord of Winterfell by the North, because 1, his leg is injured, so he wouldn't be any use in an actual battle, and 2, I doubt he'd just want to go back to Winterfell and do nothing while his family fights for their lives. So I think he'll take his chances at the wall for the time being. But before he does that, I think he is going to urge Robb to do what he believes is the right thing and support Stannis as the rightful heir to the Iron Throne. He'll give Robb the sword Ice too before he goes to the wall. With Ned alive in this timeline, even with Robb now being the new Lord of Winterfell because Ned is going to the Watch, I don't think that there's an instance where the North declares for independence. Mainly because there is no point in the long run. With Ned alive and well, even if he refuses to become Lord of Winterfell again through more extreme means like openly defying Tommen, I think Robb would listen to his dad and support Stannis, especially because he believes that if Stannis becomes king, he could just have his father pardoned and have him reinstalled as Lord of Winterfell that way once Stannis takes the throne. He would still view his father as the rightful lord and would definitely take the steps to bring him back home. If Robb supports Stannis in the War of Five Kings, this could lead to a very different conflict. Stannis pretty much had the smallest army in the war, but if Robb supports him, he'll have the North, and most likely the Riverlands as well, since they also supported Robb in canon. He could also get support from the Stormlands depending on what happens with Renly as well. If I'm being honest, I don't think Stannis having a bigger army via the North and the Riverlands changes where Renly stands on the conflict. Though he'll see Stannis as more of a threat now, I don't think it'll be enough to make Renly kneel. So if Stannis still kills Renly with a Shadow Baby, he'll take his soldiers from the Stormlands, but the Tyrells will probably still leave and still support the Lannisters, since they have no loyalty to Stannis and they want Marjorie to be queen, which may not play out the same way that it did in canon because in this timeline, Tommen and Sansa would actually like each other, and I don't see Tommen putting her aside for someone else. But I am getting ahead of myself here, because if they're gonna get to that point, they would have to survive the Battle of the Blackwater first, which would be a much larger conflict in this timeline. If the Starks and Riverlanders manage to meet up with Stannis, he has a much bigger army. This is important because even without the North and the Riverlands, Stannis almost won this battle. It was only when the Tyrells and other Lannisters showed up that he lost the battle, and that was with Wildfire having blown up his ships. So even if the same thing happens here, Stannis has way more people fighting for him. I honestly think in this timeline, Stannis wins the Iron Throne, and with his surplus of men, this is the end of the Lannisters. Even Tommen, no matter how good and kind he was in comparison to Joffrey in the main timeline, he would be killed by Stannis because he has no mercy for usurpers. I think this would have been very detrimental for Sansa in this timeline because unlike Joffrey, she would have actually had a much better time with Tommen. He would have actually liked her, been kind to her, wouldn't have subjected her to torment and abuse all the time. She might have even supported Tommen as king until Stannis came along to kill him. After the death of Tommen though, he'll give Ned a pardon from the Night's Watch and reinstate him as Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North. I also think that Stannis would make a marriage pact with the Starks since they were his biggest supporters in the conflict, and Stannis has a need for heirs. He and his wife have yet to have a son, and Stannis and Shireen are the only true-born Baratheons left. So having her marry a Stark so they can have kids with a legitimate claim to the Iron Throne and Storm's End would make sense. Now, the issue with this, though, is that the kids will be born Starks by name due to their father and Westerosi tradition, but Stannis as king could always change the name to Baratheon when the kids are born, or make the marriage matrilineal from the start to avoid all those complicated steps. However, the only way for a Stark-Baratheon marriage to become plausible and feasible in this timeline is only if Robb's brothers, Bran and Rickon, are not presumed dead or displaced. The reason I'm not considering Robb in this marriage proposal to Shireen is because he likely would have still had to marry a Frey girl. Why? Because he still needs Walder Frey. He has to go through the Twins and get his crossing if he wants to get into the Riverlands, and continue traveling south if he wants to meet Stannis. And whether or not Robb claims to be king in the north, Walder's not going to let him pass by for free. He's a very ambitious man, so he's gonna have to give up something. This is why Bran and Rickon are more pivotal here, and the only way that they're gonna be useful is if Theon does not betray the Starks in this timeline. He is the whole reason they're presumed dead in the first place, and why they even had to leave Winterfell. I honestly don't think it would be hard to keep Theon loyal in this timeline. All you would have to do is stop him from going to the Iron Islands, giving him the opportunity to betray the Starks. The whole reason he even went to the Iron Islands was to get ships for Robb so he could attack the Westerlands. But if Robb is siding with Stannis in this timeline, Stannis is not going to be focusing on attacking Tywin directly. He wants to take King's Landing, and Stannis has ships of his own, so Robb does not need Balon Greyjoy, he doesn't need the Iron Islands, and therefore he does not need to send Theon back to get the support of his father. And if that's the case, then Theon could stay loyal. He doesn't need to capture Winterfell, and Bran and Rickon are never displaced and sent up north trying to find some magical Birdman. With that being said, I think Rickon will be the one who gets betrothed to Shireen. Even though Bran is the older brother out of the two, he is disabled and most likely unable to father any children. So with Rickon being more able-bodied than his brother, he's going to be the only viable option if he's going to help Stannis get some heirs down the line. Moving on though. If Stannis wins the Iron Throne, I think one thing that's going to happen is he strips the Tyrells of their status as Lords Paramount. I'm sure he would still be sore about Mace's siege on Storm's End during the rebellion, and it just doesn't make sense for him to keep the Tyrells in power when they openly defied him for an illegitimate king. Other than that, with Stannis being king, we are looking at a pretty different timeline and some potential new conflicts. Like Stannis' change in religion. It may not be accepted by the people of Westeros who followed the Seven. They may not like the idea that R'hllor, the Lord of Light, is taking precedent over the seven gods, and they may not like the fact that Melisandre, a foreigner, has the ear of the king. So that could be an issue. Then I would even venture to say that maybe killing Tommen could have some adverse effects on his reign as well. Joffrey was a terrible king, and the people hated him. I think Tommen would be a different story though. The common folk might have had a better impression of Tommen than they did Joffrey, since he would have actually cared about them. So a point of contention in Stannis' reign could be that some people actually liked Tommen, that he was actually a caring king, and he was the true and better king, and Stannis just gets a lot of slack for killing him as a result. Outside of that though, there are still other issues like Daenerys, who may or may not be alive in this timeline. If you remember in Thrones, Dany got attacked by a scorpion that would have killed her, but it was stopped by Barristan Selmy. However, in this timeline, Barristan might not have been there to stop this from happening to Daenerys. In canon, he was dismissed by Joffrey for being too old. This insult led him to go find Daenerys across the Narrow Sea and serve her, and therefore save her. But I don't think Tommen, if he was king, would have dismissed him for such a shallow reason. If Barristan stays on the Kingsguard and stays loyal to Tommen, that scorpion might take out Daenerys. Unless Jorah stops it because he was there too in canon, but if he did react to it at all, it was much slower than Barristan. But I think that's where I'm going to leave the video here today. We changed the war, we had a new king rise to power, and we added some potential problems for the future. And I think that's good enough for now. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, tell me your thoughts down below, and I will see you all next time.